please join me in welcoming Mike Walker and Mike Behrmann and their talk about the new school security combat mindset.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for letting us speak at Converge. I've been blown away by the quality of speaker throughout the past 2 days, so it's a real honor to be here. Real quick outline. Start with some bios, then go into an intro, sort of explain the concept, our idea of the combat mindset, how it's applicable to defense. Then we're going to start with theory. Can't ignore that stuff. Move into practice, technology, testing, and then wrap things up at the end.
So I'm Mike Walker, the ethical hacking team lead at Networks Group out in Ann Arbor. Retired from the Air Force a few years ago. For the last 5 years of that, I was on the Air Force Red Team, where we did penetration testing, basically red team stuff.
My name is Mike Behrmann. I am the Managed Detection and Response Team Lead at Networks Group. I come from the DoD in the Baltimore, Washington area, not DISA. I spent the 7 years with the government mainly working in C&E operations, analyzing, planning, and directing ops. And then the last 2 years or so on the defensive side, embedded with the FBI Cyber Task Force around the corner. The real goal for this presentation is to discuss the principles, practices, and technology that actually defend networks. Increasingly, as security professionals, our clients ask us all the time the most simple question: what works? They're looking for a magic bullet. There never is one, as we all know in this room. But I wanted to come at the answer a little differently. I hear a lot of incredible experts, national, local, talk about their perspective on security, and I don't always feel like it's a good combination of red and blue. And I think when you find that common voice, that's where the greatest truth is in the security field. To that end, I wanted to use my experience as a MDR professional, Mike's exceptional experience in red team operations, to sort of arrive at what works. So a combat mindset. I made up this term, but I think it captures what we're trying to advocate for. When I'm advocating for a specific solution, when I'm advocating for a specific approach to security, I tend to think like an attacker, not like a product vendor. I hear a lot of weird promises from product vendors for many, many years, over-promising, over-claiming what their tool can do, claiming it's more or less a magic bullet. The upsetting part is clients that I have, that I know, that I want to work with, believe it. And it's simply not true. People want to make that purchase, deploy it, set it and forget it, walk away, and sleep well at night. The truth is, security, good security, requires creativity, requires activity itself, and that's where we arrive at the combat mindset. The best security programs that I know of are designed by former attackers, professional attackers. They're designed to look at the kill chain, and they take advantage of these things we see here, commonly associated with computer network attack. Those effects there, I've had to deceive, but I think they capture what we're going for, what our threshold is for good security. Everybody in the room here has heard about good security theory in a book, in a classroom, from a peer. It's not just a good idea, it's an absolute necessity. You'd be surprised how many of our clients sometimes aren't comfortable knowing exactly where their assets are or what is most valuable. They want to know what to protect first. I immediately turn around and ask them, what do you value in your network, and where is it? Where can we find it? We're going to design a solution and an architecture, ideally, around that. Defense in depth, of course. Couldn't do this presentation without mentioning that at least once. And a defensible network architecture, which is a term a mentor of mine, Richard Balich, or somebody I look up to, has coined. He's the CEO, or at least CSO, of FireEye, I believe. He's a real thought leader in the space, Air Force background, knows his stuff. That defensible network architecture includes those simple things like inventorying your network, having a logical map available for reference sake. These things are invaluable, and they're really the groundwork of any good security recommendation. Some of the people in this room are probably going to get uncomfortable with this topic. Prevention is not dead, though. It has been oversold, unfortunately. If you are working in the space that I'm working in, you don't have limitless people to look into every single threat. You need a win where you can get a win. When you have a known threat, you need a known solution for that. Prevention is critical. It's still part of the solution. The misunderstanding is the over-reliance on prevention. That's where the set it and forget it mentality comes from. But I also think of prevention in broader terms. I think of these examples I have here in front of you. I think Mike would attest that many of these things, if implemented correctly, complex passwords, things like that, can absolutely shut an attacker down or raise the stakes to a point that they're no longer comfortable operating in there and will pull out.
Yeah, and it goes into the defense in depth thing again. If we have one or two of these things, they might be speed bumps. We'll look at them and find ways around. If you implement, for example, all 7 of these, it's gonna wreak havoc on an attacker. They're gonna have to come up with a lot newer attack vectors, ways to get around, and most attackers are just probably going to give up at some point and go for the lower hanging fruit companies that have all their stuff, don't have these kind of things in place.
I think security really starts with these strong fundamentals. The favorite of mine here listed is network segmentation. Strong network segmentation, well enforced, can absolutely contain an attacker. And that's an absolute win from my perspective. Lockdown server ports, doing the simple things well. You'll notice most of these things don't carry a huge price tag, right? But they must be done well, and they can have incredible defensive effect. Detection. I know a lot of people in this room agree that detection is hugely important for the reasons I started to state with prevention being sort of insufficient. Another mentor of mine, Eric Conrad, who's a regular teacher at SANS, pioneered a course called Continuous Security Monitoring. He helped redefine what network security success is, or at least sort of advocated for this message. We'll explain what the kill chain is in a little bit later, but suffice it to say, to detect an intruder before data has left the network is still a win. It's not a breach till data leaves the network. On the same front, I hear attackers only need to be successful once, defenders must be successful 100% of the time. I think you're not dealing with enough sensors and controls, most likely, if that's the case. There's some truth to that, but again, if we look at attack methodologies along a kill chain, a win is still a win at any stage of that kill chain where we can get it. That's in keeping with the technology, that's in keeping with the reality of the threat landscape. And anytime that we can, whether it's a detection signature, deep in the kill chain, like command and control, something like that, to stop that before it gets blown out of control, before a threat propagates internally in a network, that's still absolutely a win for the IR team. Just a couple of quick bullets. We could talk for days about detection alone. But I'm a big advocate for proactive automated threat hunting, knowing what you want to look for, whether it's with a SIM or a combination of other tools, finding a good idea, something that you believe would represent a threat, a vector generally, which is different than a signature, of course, and then finding a way to automate that, move on to the next problem, find another great threat hunting idea. I'm also a big fan of military studies. I have been my entire life. And strategy itself, military strategy, plays into that. And high-value targets are a concept that I think is applicable to network security as well, particularly in an era of finite manpower, finite dollars, and finite total resources. Focusing limited attention, what limited attention you have on these special devices, these devices you would anticipate an attacker to come after, can be an invaluable approach to a strong security posture. To that same end, deception can be introduced as well. Honeypots, honey passwords. I'm all about this. I love unconventional thinking, unconventional warfare, and this fits that mold. There's a variety of solutions out there, many of them open source, again, that are available and represent high fidelity security controls.
Yeah, and just to kind of tie into what's going on today with the latest ransomware issue, things like honeypots and honey tokens, honey passwords, whatever you want to call them, it's gonna detect a lot of these kinds of attacks, especially like if you have some of these things going over port 445, doing scans of your network. If you have a honeypot that no one should ever be scanning on port 445 in this network, that's going to trigger something, and then you can lock that down. So I'm a big fan of honeypots, not as an attacker, but as a defender. I think if implemented correctly, they're awesome, and they're going to lock down or at least trigger events so that the blue team can take over and eradicate quickly.
The previous presenter did an excellent job explaining end-user behavioral analytics. That is where the industry is going as well, and that probably should be included in this presentation going forward. Scrutinizing admin behaviors and people who should not have them, recognizing that early can represent a wealth of success in terms of detecting insider threats, active intrusions, things like that. Detection is also invaluable for threat correlation, of course, with the SIM and spotting trends. Just one quick note, the third practice I wanted to talk about was response. We've talked extensively about ransomware in the other room a couple hours ago. What I heard him saying was, in addition to preparation, strong preparation of course, having a response plan is invaluable. And the gentleman who also spoke from Cisco about incident response echoed the same sentiment. That requires 24/7 threat monitoring. Understanding what the actual actionable intelligence fuel cycle means, taking the preparation, identification, and containment phases very seriously. And I included this quote from another thought leader in the space, Randy Franklin Smith. He leads the Ultimate Windows Security, great blog, webinar series. The gist of what he's saying is time to detection is pivotal, is everything. The threat will get in, as we all know. Being well prepared for that and being able to respond in kind and swiftly is absolutely critical. Brief introduction about the kill chain.
So yeah, this is our version of the kill chain. You'll see many other kill chains, including something called a cyber kill chain and things like that are trademarked. This is our own that we kind of came up with just for this presentation. It kind of simplifies the attack phases that we go through on the red team. And I like to liken it from the logical side to the physical side, just so everyone's on the same page before we start talking about it. And this doesn't even have to be logical or physical. It can be social engineering. It can be, anything wireless, anything like that. This isn't just a logical or physical, but I like to show the differences and the similarities between the two. So just walking through real quick, one of the first things we do, you guys have probably all seen this before, but I'll run through it. We do some OSINT. We learn about the company that we're targeting. Same way on the physical side. You sit outside a building and you surveil people coming in and out, right? And then we exploit somehow. On the logical side, that may be a missing patch. That may be sending a phishing email that somebody's going to click on, that kind of thing. From there, we gain system access, and then once we're inside, we map the network out, see where we are, start scanning, doing that kind of thing, figure out where the targets are that we really care about, those high-value targets especially. And our eventual goal is to get the trophy data, but again, as Mike said, it doesn't really count unless you can exfiltrate that data out. So kind of on the physical side, it's the same thing. You Like I said, you look at a building, you figure out the ebb and flow, people coming in and out. Exploitation could be a broken lock, it could be an open window, it could be tailgating behind somebody, right? And then once you get in, you breach a room, you get your bearings, you look down the hallway, look all around, see what's going on, you start going room to room, hopefully without getting caught, just like on the logical side. You find all your treasures, all the stuff, all the passwords that are written underneath people's keyboards, that kind of thing, and then you have to get out, right? If you're busted at that point, just like on the logical side, then you're done. So, game over, you're going to jail. So just a quick breakdown of the kill chain. Now, the important thing to take away from this is people say, like, kill chain, and yeah, we've got defense in depth, but they really don't. They may have a firewall and AV, and that's not defense in depth. That's two things that aren't going to really do anything. If you can put some sort of control or barrier on each one of these aspects of the kill chain, then you're gonna catch most of the people, if not all, and that's what we want to kind of foot stomp on this one. Again, if you have those cameras up, if you're monitoring for people, if they actually break in, there's alarm sensors that trip. You have to have each one of those locked down all the way through.
I'm a little obsessive about this particular topic here, the need for new tech. Mike and I work very, very closely, day in, day out, drinking coffee, talking shop, having a beer. We keep each other honest about what the latest and greatest technology and tactics are. And the more time I spend with him and his team, the more I appreciate the fact that they hold a strategic advantage over us in terms of technology. And it's not that it came from a corporation necessarily. It may be sponsored by one or curated by one, but a lot of these tools were just somebody's good idea that they made, and you're familiar with most of these names, I'd imagine. And yet, in the classic organization, the kinds of controls they have in place tend to be fairly static. They tend to be those signature-based sort of antivirus or a classic IPS that are good. They block the known good. They just don't do anything versus those unknown attack vectors. Bring in the fact that if you look at any of these big sweeping market trend reports, there's increasing evidence along the lines of client-side attacks. The simple server-side security model, strong perimeter, being sufficient, completely not. It's completely insufficient right now. If your network looks like this, if it looks like a moat surrounding a castle with a soft middle, we should talk. We need to talk right away. But I see this all the time, and it's understandable. There's a time and a place where this was appropriate. Increasingly, attackers are resorting to these client-side attacks, be they watering hole style attacks, where a drive-by exploitation event infects the browser, hits the system, or phishing. How often have we talked about phishing to this day? Even today during our presentations, it's still an amazingly effective attack vector for penetration testers, APT, and everybody in between. So now, a few of the solutions that excite us here at Networks Group that may help level the playing field a bit on the defensive side. Malware detonation tools. Right now I see a lot of this occurring at the network layer with the next generation firewalls and the like. It's brilliant though. It's a huge time saver for us. Rather than having a massive threat team that's capable of manually performing these sort of sandbox type style analysis, we have tools out there that are cloud-based that sort of in a latent fashion take a piece of malware that's perceived, run it against static signatures and obviously some dynamic behavioral analysis and produces an outcome. This is an invaluable tool, and this obviously it doesn't fit that prevention model, but it's an incredible detective model too. The classic example that comes to mind in the threat landscape right now is macros embedded in a Microsoft Office file. We were talking about that a couple hours ago in the ransomware trends presentation. It's still a huge vector. PDFs in Microsoft Office files were called out specifically as the conventional vehicle or the most common vehicle for ransomware attacks, malware detonation can help. And it tends to touch on this second stage of the kill chain, the exploitation phase.
Yeah, and traditionally, the stuff that's out there now really doesn't stop the bad guys, right? We all know that. Unless you have it highly customized for your environment and everyone's watching the logs that everyone collects, but no one seems to actually monitor. Unless you're watching that stuff and have an events log somewhere and somebody's actually going through those or has set it up correctly, you're not going to see most of the stuff that we do.
Predictive analytics is another exciting technology that was touched on a bit in the previous presentation. Conventionally, information is collected at the endpoint, and certain threat forecasts are made based on high-fidelity mathematical models. There's a couple of technologies that are trying to incorporate this kind of thing into their own products, be they legacy or new platforms themselves. The most exciting thing to me, though, is actually what it offers in the way of fileless malware attacks and protections. Those tend to affect memory itself. These sort of next-generation technologies are capable of recognizing those memory attack behaviors for maybe the first time ever. So whether it's something simple as a potentially unwanted program, a scripting tool, or frankly a hacking tool itself, these sorts of tools can actually help address that piece of the puzzle, which if you look at the kill chain itself, addresses a number of stages, and for that reason carries a lot of value.
Yeah, I got nothing for this one. Basically, so just so you guys know, down at the bottom there, there's the red is where this applies, right? So this predictive analysis could apply to each of those four down at the bottom, exploitation, foothold, scan, or pivoting within the network. And again, as long as it's set up correctly, right? These are not silver bullets. These are not set and forget. These are something that has to be usually tailored to your specific environment.
Absolutely. And then regularly curated, regularly monitored. You can quickly take down your own network if you let a tool like this go unmanaged or undermanaged for a significant period of time. This may be my single favorite topic, though, digital forensics and IR and endpoint detection and response. This also tends to be provided at the endpoint, but whether you're looking for a full system of record, pointing out correlated relationships, or even developing a policy to find those behaviors and take preventative action in the form of a policy, these tools tend to provide it. Watch lists help enable automated threat hunting, which is obviously important again with limited manpower. High fidelity threat intelligence feeds, still valuable, but just as one data point. And event tracing too, which is critical for both the threat hunting process as well as incident response. And again, on that very point, outstanding tool IR-wise. So fileless malware, it's an invaluable tool, borderline critical tool, I think, in today's landscape. Really, some of the hardest stages in the kill chain to detect threats in are these latter three. The pivoting, the objectives on target, and the command and control. I think both professionals and tools alike can really judge themselves based on their ability to work against these three stages of the kill chain. They're exceptionally difficult to do, and they certainly don't lend themselves to that set it and forget it mentality that certain vendors would like you to think.
Yeah, and again, as a side note, the C2 on the end also includes exfiltration of data. So it doesn't necessarily have to, but for simplification, we're lumping it all into the same category.
This also gets to becomes invaluable in an IR situation in terms of preparing the appropriate logs to make that IR case a swift success too. The gentleman from Cisco mentioned that over and over again. Log retention was huge. I think you would agree with this sentiment. Another sort of emerging technology are software containers. I've seen these integrated into workstation browsers to help control what users are exposed to when browsing the internet, be they web-based email, general web browsing. So in an age of drive-by type threats, exploitation kits are everywhere these days. They tend to congregate in compromised ad servers in popular websites, sometimes targeting a specific industry, sometimes just sort of a spray and pray mentality. They're exceptionally difficult to detect in the browser itself and in any endpoint solution. This new sort of emerging technology offers some value in this space. Next generation firewalls and IPSs. This is another very, very exciting technology space that affects a huge range in the kill chain itself. You're talking about automated correlation engines, which lends itself to machine learning and things like that. That's baked in. Application identification. Still a huge fan of network segmentation. Being able to decode individual applications with certainty, high certainty, with more than just the destination port, helps us craft better firewall policies. And ultimately create a scenario where we have an application whitelisting type set of rules. Also URL filtering, another invaluable data point. Knowing what destination IP was browsed to is not enough. The threat is localized. They're localized to FQDNs, not just IPs. We live in an age where virtual private servers are everywhere. We don't want to confuse a known good site with one bad apple, and we need to be able to distinguish between the two still. So the example that I could think of right now would be ransomware C2. There's some excellent ransomware tracking websites out there. They don't just define, of course, the threat by the IP itself. They go a step further, provide the fully qualified domain name that actually hosts the threat. And knowing that, from experience, with my clients, is a huge difference. That's the difference between a good day and a bad day. We need to know exactly what domain was browsed to, not just the IP itself. We need to know if we have an emergency or not.
So I guess what it all comes down to is testing is going to show you where your weaknesses are, right? So penetration testing, red team testing, full scope, all that kind of stuff. We all know what they call the pen test puppy mills, right? We've heard those in different talks before, where somebody comes in and just does a few scans and then takes their output from their scan results and maybe tries to find if they can exploit a couple things. That doesn't really cut it. You need to do more full scope red teaming to find things like your social engineering, your wireless attacks, your physical attacks, everything. We're past the point of just doing scans and calling it good. Phishing obviously is huge. It always will be until they come out with some silver bullet that doesn't allow people to click on stuff. There are some solutions that'll help with that, but for the most part, it's always going to be here. Phishing campaigns and user awareness training, security training, that kind of thing is vital. You can get numbers in the 50s and 60s click rates down to under 10%, depending on what kind of program you do. But highly recommend training. And then red versus blue exercises is kind of cool because it'll show you again where all your holes are. You can do things like launch a fake ransomware. What would happen if my company got hit by ransomware, and then do the blue guys see it, right? So you launch something like that, and it shows that you can take down an entire company, right? Or at least cost them thousands and thousands of dollars in ransomware fees. So I think blue versus red is awesome, and we're going to see a lot more of it going forward. It helps, and like Mike said, we work together pretty closely, and we learn something new from each other every day. Helps us get better on both sides. I think we're wrapping up. So basically, this is more of the phishing, right? We just want to kind of foot stomp this. This is, except for the logo, basically what this is we sent this phishing email out to a client. from their IT manager, spoofed, with a custom domain that we stood up, and then sent it to, I think, 37 people. I think out of that, like 22 people clicked and actually downloaded the HTA file and ran it, giving us a full shell on their system. You know, with click rates and file execution rates as high as that, it's an uphill battle, right? So you need to do everything in your power to make sure that the kill chain is followed, right? So if you have something in place at every spot in that kill chain, hopefully you're going to find us. You know, when you have, like I said, when you have that high of a click rate, it's going to be hard, but put as many barriers in the way as you can.
Just to summarize everything we talked about, it's our belief that strong security programs are really designed with that attacker's mentality. We call it a combat mindset at Networks Group. Strong security theory, still absolutely invaluable, not just meant for the textbooks. I love this quote, build your house on rock, not sand. And then all three of these critical practices must be recognized as part of any security program. Next generation technology offers hope. No magic bullets, but used intelligently and actively, they present individual parts of an effective layered defense. And again, testing controls mean user education and ultimately improvement. We had a funny story. One of our clients hired out a penetration test, but fell into that pen testing puppy mill variety one time. We were actively monitoring the network. Our criteria caught them, and within the first 30 or so minutes, before we even got the message out to the client, we realized our dev had recognized they were being hacked too, because there's a massive, massive log spike. Our own dev, who sits in the back room, doesn't get to do anything customer facing, is not even necessarily security minded, thought that something was up, sort of recognized that there was probably an active intrusion. We zeroed in on it within minutes, found that the gentleman was just spraying scans everywhere. Totally out of character with the network, but he is absolutely characteristic of that sort of poor pen testing practice itself. That's it.
Questions?
Beer o'clock.
Comment for you real quick. Did you already use Slidesaw?
Yeah.
Sorry,
No,
no?
sorry. Let me plug it back.
Your last slide, your one takeaways. Have you guys seen which were choose time-based security?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Have you seen which were choose book time-based security?
No.
It's like a 1990s book. I think he like self-published it. I swear to God, it's like little stick figures.
Huh.
But one of the great things is you got prevention, detection, response. One of the things he posits is that all security can be defined. Security as a success can be defined as the time for protection is greater than the time for detection plus the time for response. So where you guys seen this, you almost laid out the exact same formula.
I honestly never heard of it.
Yeah, it's worth checking out. And then that gets to what you said earlier, right? Which is, and I thought you had a great point about this. If you have the ability to detect on multiple points of the kill chain, and then have a response there, that detection response is quicker than how long it takes your adversary to go through that kill chain. You stand a really good chance to get them off the network and win.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a good point, is not only detect, but actually do something about it.
Right.
Because that's being logged somewhere. We as attackers know that's being logged somewhere, but we also know that no one ever checks logs, right? Because it's logging to Splunk somewhere, and they're going to get to it someday. Or even if they do see an anomaly pop up, they've already had a false positive on that 300 times, and so they just click it again, or set up a rule to ignore that rule, you know.
It was the case not too long ago. We had a client that was taking advantage of one of these next generation preventative controls. We were actively monitoring the logs for them per contract. We were able to set up an alarming and triage system to promote an alert that we had crafted for them in sort of an automated fashion. What that basically meant, though, was the IT security admin was aware of the issue on the endpoint before the user could even submit the help desk ticket. He literally wrote us a thank you note saying that. So on a smaller scale, being able to get in front of problems before they escalate, create more paperwork, and tie up more people's times, an effective security monitoring solution will go a long way in that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.